Hello, everyone, and welcome to another week of learning and graded assignments. As you will recall, oh, and by the way, I am going to mention some extra credit, so stay tuned. But let's just start with a little bit of context, a little bit of review. So during a previous week or a previous task, we learned more about four kinds of intellectual virtue. Do you happen to remember the names of any of those intellectual virtues? So they were intellectual humility, intellectual courage, intellectual empathy, and intellectual perseverance. Remember, these are four kinds of virtues that have to do with being a good thinker, a good learner, and a good communicator. Continue to be mindful of these traits, noticing when you are in a context or situation wherein the manifestation of said traits may be a particular, may be of particular importance or significance, helpful, or even necessary for doing well on something in this course. After a while, your deliberate efforts to reflect these intellectual virtues will become second nature, and you'll just automatically just manifest these traits in various contexts, in contexts beyond this course, beyond assignments and learning for this course. You'll be able to manifest them automatically in different scenarios, academic and otherwise. We also learned previously more about the philosopher's approach to analyzing arguments from the standpoint of logic. Remember that logic is a branch of philosophy. You read about that in your first Learn Smart task for the semester. In learning more about the philosopher's approach to analyzing argument, you received written instruction with more details about said logician's concept of an argument, and you learned more about statements and non-statements and whatnot via the Soft Talk module, which gave you basic definitions, concepts, rules, methods, principles. That lesson was so important. It's a foundational lesson that you will apply throughout the rest of the semester. And of course, that was followed up with a video-based instruction, coaching, demonstration, and mentoring that showed you how to mark up an argument in light of what you learned in the Soft Talk module. So you got new concepts, new rules, methods, and principles, and you took your mandatory notes for a grade, and you will be using those throughout the semester. So during this week or this task, we're going to add to our toolkit by learning how to do something called argument clarification. So should I happen to use the term argument clarification, I'm talking about the application of all that we have learned with respect to argument analysis. I'm talking about visually displaying your analysis of an argument as you've been taught so far. You'll learn new stuff that today that you will do, or this week or during this task, that you will be expected to do with arguments in terms of visually marking an argument to show, to demonstrate the thinking that you did to analyze that argument. But we're also going to learn some new things. So I want you to, let me pause there. So at the end of the day, we're going to be adding to what we might call a toolkit. Okay, so in effect, we're creating a common toolkit that we can all use to maximize the philosophical exploration of reality, morality, and knowledge using the COVID-19 pandemic as our case study or context in doing so. And this common, toolkit consists of the intellectual virtue concepts and being mindful of them, as well as the argument analysis concepts, principles, and methods that we are learning. So this is going to be helpful to us in thinking through various matters. Like a philosopher, you will be applying what you learn to your own arguments throughout the semester. You'll be applying some of what you learn to the arguments of others. As you interact with the other arguments of others, you're going to need to be able to identify their conclusions, their premises, and whatnot. So you will be using this knowledge throughout the entire semester. Okay, so that said, for this week, you will be doing your last Soft Talk module. So you'll get some more facts and definitions and concepts and principles when it comes to other stuff you can do with arguments when you're trying to understand the parts and how they hang together. Notice that we're not evaluating arguments right now. We're not judging them. We're not saying whether they are good or bad as such. Before you can do that, you have to know what the parts are. You first have to practice intellectual empathy. Anytime you're analyzing an argument, trying to figure out what the parts are, what they're doing, what is meant, you're using intellectual empathy. You cannot do argument analysis without intellectual empathy. Even if you agree with everything in the argument, you have to have intellectual empathy to know what the argument is about, to even know whether or not you agree with it. But we're not focused on evaluation right now still. So then you'll get some basic information in your last talk module when it comes to more stuff that we can do with arguments. And then, as with the previous lesson, you will get video-based instruction that will have new lessons, new concepts, new rules that you will apply to the arguments in paragraph form, and there'll be more coaching and guided practice. It's really important for you to do your part 100% in the skill building and knowledge acquisition part of this. So I'm doing as much as I can to help you develop skills that you apply throughout the semester. So, make sure that you're taking full that you're giving 110%, because the more you do that, the more you're going to grow from the lessons, the more relevant they will be to you. So what else do I want to say? Oh yeah. So in the end of the day, not the end of the day, but I have 3 things I want to bring to your attention. You can choose from one of these options for up to 5 points of extra credit on both of, do I want to say both? Well, let's say, yeah, so both, I'll do both. Both of your week 5 tasks that you submit for a grade, you can get up to 5 points for both. It's going to depend on how well you do in following the video-based instructions that I'm about to give you. So what you could do is, I think it was during the first soft talk module on intellectual virtue, I had a little lesson in there on assumptions. So what you can do is you can find your notes. What did I say about assumptions? You can quote 1 or 2 things I said, but then you have to add at least 3 sentences of elaboration. You can tell me what you found interesting about my little mini lecture on assumptions. What were specific things that I said about assumptions, and then you could tell me about an assumption that you once had that you didn't realize, or a belief that turned out to be an assumption that you didn't even realize was an assumption. Or you can tell me about a time when you had an assumption that turned out to be false. But of course, your example needs to be aligned with my lecture on assumptions. So again, I think that was the video that I used to introduce you to the first soft talk module, the general one on intellectual virtue. I was walking you through that module, and at some point I did a lecture on assumptions. There was another lecture that I did. There was a video that I used to introduce you to the soft talk module focused on argument. So the first soft talk module on argument, I had that lecture video that said, hey, let's go over some of the answers. Let me give you some tips and warnings. And at some point, I don't know if it was during that module or if it was during one of my lectures for when we were about to start doing tasks C through E, but there was a lecture I did where I talked about each of the intellectual virtues and how they applied to argument analysis. So now that I'm thinking about this, it might be in the lecture to the soft talk module that first focused on argument. So if you find that information there, you can use it. But now that I'm thinking about it, I know that my most recent lecture on that was one of the first videos in the task where you had a bunch of videos to watch as you learn to mark up arguments. So it was one of those. You can present what I said about, each of the intellectual virtues. What did I say about each intellectual virtue and how it relates to argument analysis? If you do any of this extra credit, so just pick one of those, either my lecture on assumptions or focus on intellectual virtue. If you do the intellectual virtue one, in addition to the points that I made about each intellectual virtue, I want you to then focus on one intellectual virtue that you think you reflected really well while working through the argument analysis, coaching, demonstration, and videos, and write 2 or 3 sentences that prove to me, using the definition for one of the intellectual virtues, prove to me using that definition and words from the definition in your explanation, in your justification, that you really did manifest that virtue while working through those video demonstrations on how to mark up your argument, how to do diagrams, how to do patterns. So you've got an option. Draw from my lecture on assumptions and talk about that, or draw from my lecture on intellectual virtues and your ability to work through the video demonstrations on argument analysis, and you can get up to 5 extra points on all of your new tasks to submit this week.